There we go. Okay, so from Republic to Empire. Notice the title, From Republic to Empire. Main ideas. The internal stability of the Roman Empire eventually led to civil wars and increased power for their military. So what we're going to see is who ended up taking power in Rome. We said this. Well, the Senate, right? Right, Wyatt? The Senate, okay? The Senate over years ended up taking control of Rome. They were really the ones that were pulling the strings. Uh, and that is effectively due to greed. Really? I mean, it's a bunch of old rich dudes with a lot of money. They own a lot of land, and they just want to make sure they have and maintain as much power as possible, right? So when you have corruption and you have people that are just looking out for themselves, what happens to everybody else? Huh? Yeah, well, they forgot. Well, they're not even caring about in the first place, but are they just? What happens to them? What if you guys all? What if every time you guys like miss class, sports, sick, whatever, and I was just like, I don't care about you. I'm not putting your grades in. What if grade checks came around for athletics and I was just like, screw you guys. I don't care. I'm not doing it. I don't have time for that. You're gonna be very happy with me? No. And eventually, what's gonna happen? Revolt, right? Exactly. Now, if all of you decided to try to take on me, who's gonna win? Well, I mean, maybe a different class would have a chance, but no, I'm just kidding. So, right, numbers win, right? And a majority of the people aren't in the Senate out of a whole Roman Empire, right? Even if we talk about just Roman citizens, the Latins, those that live in Latium, a majority of them are of that merchant, small farming class, right? And not only that, but what do those guys do? They mainly support what? Well, yes, but no. What did I say yesterday? Most of the small farmers make up what? The army. The army. So who's fighting the battles? Right? These small landowners, but they're a majority of the population. So wait a minute. Who's going to defend the Senate then if they're all disgruntled and ticked off? Right? So these guys become disenfranchised. We talked about that yesterday. And so we're going to see the negative effects of that and who they decide to follow instead today. Tracking? Okay. So, eventually we're going to have some civil wars, increased power for the military instead of for the republic. We're going to talk about Octavian, who became titled Caesar Augustus. He became named emperor. We're going to talk about some stabilization. We're going to talk about some destabilization. A bunch of emperors today. Just fair warning, be prepared. There's going to be a bunch of names thrown at you. You're just going to have to study. Okay? So some key terms: a triumvirate, a dictator, imperator, people to identify: Crassus, Pompey, Julius Caesar, Octavian, Antony, Augustus, Nero. Nero was a bad dude. You guys know about Nero? He's crazy. He's nuts. Like burned down half of Rome, killed a bunch of people, hated Christians. The Rubicon River, Dacia, Mesopotamia, the Sinai Peninsula, the Rhine River, and the Danube River. We're going to skip that right now because I think that's what screwed up my voice being recorded last time. Sorry, hold on just one second. I got to open up something for somebody. My computer's being slow. Blaine, read that. Ides. The Ides, brother. You're all right. It's okay. Very good. So the Ides of March. If you ever hear the term the Ides of March, talking about like the 15th of March, that's when Julius Caesar was murdered. He was invited into the Senate for like a meeting, and then they all stabbed him. Stabbed by a bunch of people. You guys heard that story before? Yeah, of course. Yeah, by members of the Senate. Yeah, and his best friend Brutus. Oh yeah, I know. You guys know the famous. He said, "Et tu, Brutus," and then he died. Meaning, you too, Brutus. You, my homeboy. You gonna stab me like that? And then he croaked. All right, growing inequality and rest and a new role for the army. Lots and lots of stuff. This section is kind of long, it's kind of wordy, so I put a lot of words and stuff on the slides and try to pull out just the important stuff for you, okay? By second century BC, the Senate made up mostly of the landed aristocracy governed Rome. And we talked about that, right? The patricians mainly ran the Senate. As a matter of fact, I think only patricians were allowed in the Senate. Senate and political offices were increasingly controlled by a small group of these super rich, wealthy landowning dudes. The Senate also became the ones that directed the wars and took control of both foreign and domestic policy. So they're really stealing as much power for themselves as they could. Because who was supposed to control the wars? Who was supposed to conduct war? Huh? The plebeians? Well, there was an office. There was a person in charge. What was the name? A consul. Very good. A consul. Okay. But, as we mentioned just a second ago, these aristocrats were a tiny minority of the Roman public. They are by no means the majority of the people of Rome. Okay? So, the backbone of Rome's army, as we also mentioned, were these plebeians, these smaller landowning guys. And many of them ended up losing their land to these large, wealthy landowners. They would get in debt. They wouldn't have a way to repay it. And then the only way that they could repay it was to give up their land to the patricians. So now all of a sudden you have, there's already a little bit of dissent between the plebeians and the patricians, right? These small landowners and these large landowners. And then, sorry, I lost my train of thought. And then these small landowners, they lose their land. So what are they going to do? Oh, look, what are they going to do? They're going to revolt? It's not their fault. It's not the patricians' fault they lost their land. How are they going to revolt? I can't hear you. I'm sorry. A new urban class? Way to read your slides. Well done. They are going to form a new urban class. Right? So what are they, I mean, they got to go somewhere. They don't have land to live on anymore. They got to make money somehow. They got to find a job. But what happens is they all move to the city and they're all broke and they're all poor and they don't have jobs and they don't have a way to make money. And so you end up with this new impoverished class. And so what happens is the rich get richer, right? And the poor get poorer. And there's a larger gap in between those that the haves and the have-nots. Does that make sense? Okay. So that happens in the Roman Empire, and that is only going to create more dissent between the common people, if you will, and the patricians. So we have some guys, most of Rome that we're going to talk about today is guys that try to do a good thing, and then it gets corrupted by greedy people, right? So the Republic was created, right, to try to do a good thing because who did the Romans distrust originally? The monarchies, right? We talked about that yesterday. So they created a what? A republic. They created a republic because they didn't trust the monarchy. But then the republic, those that were in charge of the republic, the Senate, they got greedy and they got corrupt. Okay? So things are going to go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So a couple of brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, realized that there were problems in the republic, in the way that the Senate was handling business. So they saw the huge decline of small farmers and realized they needed to fix it. And they decided that there needed to be some reform and called for laws giving public land that the aristocrats owned back to the landless poor, back to these small farmers so they could have a way to support themselves. How do you think the Senate felt about that? Not that you can't just read more on your slides there. Yeah, they were not happy about it, right? Okay, so in 133 BC, a group of senators killed Tiberius, and then a short time later, they also killed his brother Gaius. So if we don't like you, we'll just kill you. We got all the power. That's kind of the theme we got going on here. A little bit of the Wild Wild West. What's that? They're kind of mean, yeah, man. But well, I guess that's how you maintain power back in the day. But when this kind of corruption and these things start happening, typically the first response is fear, right? You just keep your mouth shut, try not to get killed. And then eventually there's enough people that are tired of being scared and they stand up against it. And that's not a good thing. That's when revolts happen. Okay? We're going to see this over and over and over and over and over again in history. You guys know what happened in like the spring of 2000, what was it, 13 or 2011, when a bunch of wars started, a bunch of civil wars started throughout the entire Middle East. You know what that was called? Very good, Tasha. The Arab Spring. Do you know what it was about? I'll take that. I'll take that just because we haven't talked about it yet. We're going to talk about the Arab Spring a lot in the second semester. But this is the same thing that happened then, right? They had oppressive, not necessarily dictatorial, but in some countries, dictatorial rulers, and they were sick and tired of it. And so a lot of young college students rose up and revolted, and that's part of how the civil war in Syria started. You guys know how the civil war in Syria started? Nope, way off this time. 15 teenage kids were screwing around, being stupid teenagers one day, and they wrote some. You guys, who's the president of Syria? His name is Bashar al-Assad. Okay, and they wrote some anti-Assad rhetoric, spray painted it on a wall in the city. So Assad had his army go get these kids, beat the living daylights out of them, took them to jail, tortured them, and held them for like a year or two. It was messed up, and people were not happy about this, and so they revolted. They were just finally sick and tired of the oppressive, dictatorial nature of Bashar al-Assad. Tracking? Okay, so we're going to see this over and over and over and over again throughout history. All right, moving on. So a change in the army worsened matters. In the 1st century BC, a general named Marius recruited soldiers from among the landless poor and promised them land if they swore allegiance to him. Sound like a good idea? Kidde, what do we think? Sound like a good idea? Why not? Why is that a bad idea? We had all these people with no land, and now he's giving them a job and giving them land. Sound like a good idea? Sounds like a good idea to me. Jalen, what do you think? Good idea? Yeah? Except the problem is, if all of you guys are poor and you all need a job, and then I give you the job, are you going to be loyal to me or to the city of Fargo? To me. You're going to be loyal to me. So what Marius does in trying to do a good thing and help these people out is he actually created a precedence for generals to have a loyal army or an army that was loyal to them instead of being loyal to Rome. And this is going to happen for a long time throughout Rome. Got it? So traditionally, the small landowning farmers had made up the army and their loyalty was to the state, but now their loyalty was to Marius instead. So Marius also forced his generals to become involved in politics so he could get laws passed that would give his soldiers the land that he promised them. And he left a powerful legacy of rulers to take control by force with loyalty of the army to the general. And again, we're going to see this all throughout history. Yes, sir? Did Nero kill Marius? Did Nero kill? I don't know if Nero killed Marius or not. I don't think so, because I think Nero was a ways after Marius. Sulla was the next general to take political power, again with his army backing him. He was given command of a war in Asia Minor, and the Council of the Plebes, as you remember, if we talked about them, well, if you remember, we talked about them yesterday, tried to give command to Marius. And so we're going to have a little bit of a civil war. You've got Sulla, who's got his army that backs him. You've got Marius, who has his army that backs him. And the Council of the Plebes tried to put Sulla in charge. And so Marius didn't like that. And then they fought, and Sulla won. And he seized Rome in 82 BC. Whoop. So in an effort to restore a traditional Roman republic, again, going back to a republic, not having an emperor is what Sulla tries to do. He restores power to the Senate and takes most of the power away from the popular assemblies that we talked about yesterday. From 82 to 31 BC, civil wars filled Rome. So for decades, civil wars filled Rome. And three men, Crassus, Pompey, and Julius Caesar, ended up coming out on top. Crassus was a wealthy guy. Pompey and Julius Caesar were great generals in the Roman army. And they combined their power to form the first triumvirate in 60 BC. And a triumvirate is just three dudes that rule. If it's a small group of people that are ruling, what can we also call it? An oligarchy. Very good. Triumvirate is a government by three people with equal power. All right, so the way they typically did it is like, let's say Caesar and Pompey are the two big generals, right? They would split up their command. Like Pompey would have Asia Minor, and Caesar would have like Europe, okay? Because that's actually where he was. He was up in France. Back then it was called Gaul, Gaul. It's on your map. You'll see tomorrow. He was up in Gaul, and so they were divided, but they had their own armies with them in these different places. So what happened was Crassus was killed, and the Senate decided that, okay, there's only two guys left that were in charge of this triumvirate, and they decided that instead of having Caesar and Pompey be in charge, that they would just have Pompey be in charge. So how do you think Caesar felt about that? He's not happy about it, right? So he says, no way, Jose, man, that ain't happening. So they tried ordering Caesar to set down his command of his army. Caesar says, no way, it's not happening. And he takes his army, again, that's loyal to him, not loyal to Rome, and he crosses the Rubicon River, which is a famous, it's like known as the point of no return. It's in northern Italy, crosses the Rubicon River, marches on Rome. Pompey and Caesar fight another civil war in the Roman Empire, and Julius Caesar comes out on top. Defeats Pompey and becomes dictator of the Roman Empire in 45 BC, but it's not going to last too terribly long because he's going to get murdered the next year. He gave land to the poor. He did see that there needed to be some reforms, right? He tried taking care of the small people, made some land reforms, tried giving land back to the small farmers, expanded the Senate to 900 members, because originally how many people were in the Senate? 300, right? 300 people in the Senate, expanded it to 900, so with those extra 600 people, he put a bunch of his friends in the Senate, so that anytime he wanted to get something passed, right, he had people that supported him in the Senate. And then, long story short, in 44 BC, a group of senators and his friend Brutus killed him because they didn't like him. Wouldn't it be so much easier if we could just kill everybody we didn't like? It's terrible, right? I mean, all you would be dead. Just kidding. Somebody's going to hear this on YouTube and be like, that is the worst teacher ever. All right, so we had, what was Pompey, Crassus, and Julius Caesar called? The first triumvirate. Pay attention to me when I ask you questions. I know, I did it on purpose. Caesar, Crassus, Pompey. They were called what? The first triumvirate, right? Okay. Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus formed the second triumvirate after Caesar was killed. So three more pretty good dudes take power, try to make some good reforms. But this town ain't big enough for the two of them. Octavian and Antony divided Rome in half. Okay, Octavian took the west, Antony took the east. But like I said, this town ain't big enough for the two of us, and so they're gonna have another civil war. And Octavian and Antony fight, and Antony fell in love with Egypt's Queen Cleopatra. You guys have heard of Cleopatra and Antony? Cleopatra and Antony, they go to battle with Octavian. Octavian wins. Antony and Cleopatra go down to Egypt, and you'll need to know this battle, by the way, the Battle of Actium. That's where Octavian defeated Antony and Cleopatra. Antony kills himself by falling on a sword, and Cleopatra kills herself by getting bit by a cobra. She committed suicide by getting bit by a snake. It'd be terrible. That'd be a really bad way to go. The civil wars and the Roman Republic ended. Notice I said the Roman Republic ended, so we don't have really a Senate that's in charge anymore. And a new period of Roman history known as the Age of Augustus began in 31 BC. Octavian, who defeated Antony, proclaimed the restoration of the Republic in 27 BC, gave only some power to the Senate, and became Rome's first emperor. So he's the first real official emperor of Rome. And that same year, the Senate titled him Augustus, Octavian Augustus, or the revered one. And they also called him Imperator, which means commander-in-chief. So he was the emperor, and they made him emperor-in-chief of the army. Imperator, one word. He had a big old giant army, 28 legions, 5,000 troops apiece, plus about 130,000 in reserves. And then he also created this new type of army. These guys are like the Secret Service, the Praetorian Guard. These are bad dudes, and they are loyal only to the emperor. These are his personal bodyguards. You don't mess with them. Okay, bad dudes, the Praetorian Guard. Augustus stabilized Rome's frontiers. We're going to talk a little bit about some like Scots and some Germanic tribes that come in and try to attack Rome because it's so big. So he stabilizes the frontiers. Eventually, though, he gets in a fight with some German warriors. They get in a battle, and he loses a bunch of his men, and it like devastates him. He can't get over it. He's never lost before, and so he literally spends the rest of his days banging his head on a wall. Not able to get over it. And he said, give me back my legions. Just banging his head on the door, wanting his men back because he lost. He couldn't get over it. It devastated him. So, then we have the period called the Early Empire that lasts from 14 AD to 180 AD. After Augustus, the emperor was allowed to pick his successor from his family. Okay? So what does that sound like? A monarchy, right? Which gets away from everything that they wanted to do in the first place with the Republic. What's up? Yeah. So the first four emperors after Augustus were from his family: Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, and Nero. And you're going to see some of these in the video on Friday. These were not the greatest dudes in the world. Okay? They're not all fit to be leaders. Nero was crazy, hated Christians, persecuted them, and not a religious thing, but that's just the group that he chose to persecute. What he would do is he would take Christians, he would have his Praetorian Guard go out in the middle of the night, take them out of their homes, stick them on a pike, which is like a long wooden spear, dip their bodies in oil, and then put the other end of the pike in the ground and then light them on fire. And that's how he would light the streets at night. Pretty crazy dude, right? It's pretty messed up. He also ended up burning down like half of Rome. Not good people we're talking about. He also killed his own mom. You know, really the kind of guy you want to invite over for Christmas. That's what we're talking about here. Yes, ma'am. Hmm. The Old Testament. I, okay, maybe. Well, maybe. Yeah. I guess the way that I learned. That's a good question. So I learned that story from. Actually, I learned that story in church, but I don't know. Maybe the times are offset. I don't know either. I don't know. Well, so as we're moving, so we're in AD now with these guys. Yeah, we're not in BC anymore because Nero would have been at the end of this 180 AD. Yep, because Jesus died in like 30 or 33 AD. They assess. Yep. Uh, Nero was so crazy, his own army didn't like him, and they revolted against him, and he committed suicide. So after Nero, we get guys called the Five Good Emperors, and they were Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. If you've heard, seen the movie Gladiator, that's what the dude's name in Gladiator is, Marcus Aurelius. Created a time of peace called the Pax Romana. You need to know that. It means Roman peace. It's just this 100 years that Rome didn't have a bunch of civil war and stuff going on, and they prospered. Stopped lighting Christians on fire, respected the ruling class, maintained peace, just kept things level for a while. They did a bunch of things that you would expect the government to do too. They instituted programs to help the poor, educate children, build big building projects like aqueducts, okay, bridges, roads, all these things that the governments are supposed to do, not being corrupt and stealing the money for themselves. And this is just kind of just some stuff you need to know. One of the things that they did do, like Hadrian, built this giant wall called Hadrian's Wall, which I think is actually on the next slide to protect the Roman Empire from the tribes to the north. So they just took care of their people, which hadn't happened in a little while. We good? There you go. There's the Hadrian's Wall I was talking about. Yep. Good. Okay. Um, So by the second century, the Roman Empire covered about 3.5 million square miles. They estimate the population was around 50 million people. Um, they did some other good things, acknowledging local customs of people we talked about yesterday, right? Allowing governments to take care of themselves, granting Roman citizenship to everybody in the Roman Empire, which is kind of crazy. All free people got Roman citizenship in 212 AD. So if that means you have a say in government. You're able to vote. Again, things just became prosperous. Trade was up. Farming was still the basis of Rome's prosperity. Most of the work for the people. You need to know this term, latifundia. Land in the states called latifundia dominated the farming. You with me, Elijah? Okay. Just more stuff that you guys need to read. You guys don't have any blanks on here, right? Okay. And that's the end of it. So what do we got? Number 1, Commander-in-Chief. Imperator. Number 2. There you go.